Good evening. Just going to give it a couple of seconds before some people arrive. Hope everyone's doing well. The topic is a little bit going to be interesting, so to speak, very controversial, and something that's imperative to elaborate on enough where I have to make a video regarding it. But I'll try to be as clear as possible regarding this subject. And what I want to concentrate on tonight is the nature of conspiracy. The nature of conspiracy and the nature of fringe conspiracy. And you're probably asking, well, what's the difference, basically? Well, for example, I'm a conspiracy theorist. Many of the fringe conspiracy theorists would think I'm actually supporting the official narrative. Debunkers would say that I'm a fringe conspiracy theorist. So I'm neither truth or debunker in this regard. I don't have a group I commiserate with. I'm an individual investigator and researcher. I don't commiserate with groups. Nothing wrong with it, but I just tend to work better alone. What's the difference between a conspiracy theorist and a fringe conspiracy theorist? Where a conspiracy theorist basically looks for anomalies in an event that is not investigated upon. Fringe conspiracies are conspiracies, anomalies that are not factual. They're based on speculation and sometimes based on irrational speculation. Now, it's okay to speculate, but you can't use it as a form of evidence. And what I want to do tonight is talk about certain people that have hijacked, for the lack of a better word, the 9/11 truth movement with these fringe conspiracies, which have basically reverted the truth movement back many years, and has actually, incidentally enough, has actually helped the federal government in a way where the movement itself has basically looked at dead ends and has the public basically ignoring them due to their fanaticism about certain theories. And this could be traced all the way back to 2001, even just the few weeks after the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. A French author by the name of Thierry Meyssan basically wrote a book called Le Pentgate, in which he asserts that a plane did not crash into the Pentagon because the Pentagon damage hole was 16 feet wide. And what he used as the evidence was the second story Pentagon damage point, which is the second floor. The first floor was basically obscured due to the firemen's, the white foam of the fire truck from Fort Myer that was there. I'm sorry, Arlington County. And basically, these were limited pictures that came out. And he used this as evidence. In fact, he still, to this day, 21 years later, still thinks the hole is 16 feet wide. And to him, basically, he thinks that it was an American warship that shot a missile into the Pentagon, thereby creating the damage. Well, he wasn't alone. In the immediate months after that book came out, purveyor of many fringe conspiracies and the godfather of certain of them is Alex Jones, and as well as a Wisconsin University professor, retired Jim Fetzer. And through them, a lot of the conspiracies, fringe conspiracies, began to abound. There was actually a C-SPAN, live C-SPAN committee that was held in 2000, I think, 5, that was chaired by Alex Jones and others like Kevin Barrett and others, as well as Jim Fetzer, where Jim Fetzer proposes that there are 10 things that the 9/11 hijackers are fake. And he asserts that they were not seen by any airline employees, which is a lie. They were. And also that the hijackers are alive, which is basically a buff off a BBC article in which they said some hijackers are alive. What they didn't realize was that they were Arabs who had similar sounding names. Now, in the Arab world, the Muslim world, especially with Arabs, they have very similar names. For example, one of the hijackers' names is Abdul Aziz Al Amari. He was involved with the hijacking of American Airlines Flight 11. Well, the person that actually called in to BBC was Abdul Aziz Rahman Al Amari. He actually was a Saudi pilot. There was another person who lived in Saudi Arabia who is Abdul Aziz Omari. No relation to the hijacker Abdul Aziz Al Amari. He too lived in Riyadh. Now, to propose this issue, to go to like lectures and live committees, when you're reaching a large audience, if you're an honest investigator, you basically would like to share with them information, factual information, because you're putting the faith, the crowd is putting the faith to your words. Many of these people don't just take notebooks and pens and start writing down certain things. You would like to see that. That's what an educated audience would do. But some things they'll just go there and just listen and just believe them. Because look, we have a university professor from University of Wisconsin who basically is talking about this issue. Well, he's a professor. He should know more than me, the average person, not knowing that that person is basically espousing fringe theories that are based on nothing more than a misrepresentation of the information, as well as a biased worldview or a biased view of September 11, 2001. And a lot of these founders of these remarkable fringe conspiracies have basically took it upon themselves to basically only talk to a certain group of people. And these are people who will take their words on faith. They will do no basic research of their own. And a large majority of these people have a political affiliation with the very extreme right, away from classic conservatism, away from the center right. These are the people that believe that we didn't land on the moon or that nobody was killed at Sandy Hook, that the earth is flat. You know, these are really the irrational ideas that we are currently seeing with very extremists like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz, for example. By the way, Alex Jones is insinuated in this group of people as well. Extreme leftists are not propagandists regarding these issues of like 9/11, JFK, moon landings. However, what the extreme left, they are basically propaganders of anything to do with the political field, the neoliberal field. And what this did in the early years of 2001 and afterwards was basically helped hijack the movement. Now, what am I saying here? Is basically there was a truth movement that initially rose out of September 11, 2001, but they weren't called a truth movement. They never called themselves anything at all. In fact, what they were called was the steering committee by the media. These are the Jersey widows, as they're commonly known. Um, the ones whose husbands have been killed at the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. And what they did was they formed a group and pressured the government to conduct an investigation into the terrorist attacks. And they got the public behind them because, oh, why not? These are people that they can relate to. These are everyday working people, just like me and you. And basically, they wanted their own government to conduct an investigation. And they did. They got that right. In fact, they not only created or helped to create the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks of September 11, 2001, commonly known as the 9/11 Commission, but also the Joint House Inquiry into the September 11, 2001 attacks. The 9/11 Commission looked at a much broader angle, where the Joint House Inquiry looked at the intelligence services, pre-intelligence. But hey, at least they got something done. They got the media to attention, and the government was forced to do something about it because the public backlash was great. It was influential. It was massive. And these women had a powerful voice. And they were led by early advocates like Paul Thompson, John Gold, and Kyle Hentz and John Judge. And even though that the 9/11 Commission in its final report basically ignored 80 to 85% of their questions, at the very least, they got something done. They forced the government to do something. And these were not fringe conspiracy theorists. These people that I mentioned, Paul Thompson is the creator of historycommons.org. John Judge and Kyle Hentz were the founders of 9/11 Citizens Watch. Real movements, real sites that had pertinent information. Information, not beliefs, not fringe conspiracies. But almost like clockwork, because of this, we got the likes of Alex Jones and Jim Fetzer and Thierry Mason. And after the 9/11 Commission finalized its report in 2004 and the Joint House Inquiry ended in 2003, the fringe movement began. There was a film that was produced by a person named Davon Kleist. It is the first film I ever saw for 9/11. It's called In Plain Sight, where the notion of planes that were crashing into the World Trade Center had actually missiles underneath the plane. And what they were using was amateur videos of the planes hitting the World Trade Center, where there was this flash of light, which is actually kinetic energy of a plane actually traveling at a high speed into a very hard inanimate object. Speed equals force, meeting object. And that's what the flash is from. But to Davon Kleist, and what he proposes is that was a missile, which is pretty ridiculous when you think about it, because what he's insinuating is that the planes are military drones, but they weren't actual hijacked planes. And by that end, by default, and he won't admit it, but by default, he's now insinuating that American and United Airlines are now either in on the plot, on the cover-up of the murder of American people, or they're coerced into being a part of the plot. Now, we're talking about security personnel who checked the hijackers for weapons. We're talking about the ticket agents who gave them their boarding passes. We're talking about the phone calls made on these planes that said they were being hijacked, that somehow now these calls are faked. So that would insinuate a much larger conspiracy, more than what's actually needed at this point, stating that the public sector is now involved in a very high, elaborate, major operation. involving the federal government and maybe foreign intelligence as well. Now, why is this irrational? Well, one, it's not proven. That's for one. There is no evidence to show that these hijacked planes had missiles underneath them and they were drones. And two, none of the people that I just mentioned have come out and said that the story that they told you is wrong. And if you're going to say, well, of course they're not going to say it because they're still under threat. Well, that would mean that for 21 years, the federal government had to have agents on top of these people for every single day of their life, monitoring them. And we're involving many hundreds, even thousands of people, even first responders who were involved with the search and rescue, involved with the collection of plane debris and human remains in New York and Pennsylvania and Washington, D.C. Firemen, EMS, police, local and state. I'll leave the federal agencies outside of this. So you would have a lot of people in the public sector involved. Where are all these agents coming from that monitor these people to make sure that the story lines up after 21 years? And that means they still would have to be involved with the monitoring these people after all these years. So this is why I call it a fringe conspiracy based on nothing more than imagination. In 2006, a film made by three young college students, Jason Burmis, Corey Rowe, and Dylan Avery, in which it was going to be a play based on 9/11 called Loose Change. And this film became the most popular 9/11 film in the world. They did two revisions. The second one, which was supported by the nefarious Alex Jones, the godfather of the Fringe conspiracy movement of the 20th century. And this film basically reached millions of people. And in it, they propagate that, yes, the hijacked planes were indeed swapped for military drones, that people really didn't see planes, that they were plants, crisis actors, and that what happened in Shanksville at the Pentagon was there was no plane crashing into any of these areas. They misreport what eyewitnesses said, especially in Shanksville, as well as the Pentagon, and also purport that only the U.S. federal government, with maybe Saudi help, had been involved with the 9/11 attacks. They tend to stay away from Israel at this point. In fact, they don't even report anything about Israel or the moving front companies or the Israeli art student ring. And what this did basically was irredeemable. It was because they reached probably 2 generations worth of people and misinformed them intentionally. They too believed that the hole was 16 feet wide, just like Dave Von Kleist. Incidentally, Dave Von Kleist actually supported the film. So they took Thierry Mason's idea and incorporated it into their own and made a film. As well as other misconceptions based on the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, but didn't care to mention Bajinka plot or Millennium plot or the NSA wiretaps of bin Laden's satellite phone in a house in Yemen. They tend to regretfully forget this information, and these are actual anomalies that are not reported in 9/11 Commission report, but briefly mentioned in the Joint House Inquiry. And after that, Loose Change became so popular, so widespread, that, and so unchecked, because at this point, the 9/11 Truth Movement was becoming inundated with these fringe conspiracies. And at the time, the early proponents of the truth movement didn't vet these people. In other words, they left their theories unchecked because they were more worried about quantity rather than quality. And I can understand this because they're trying to get a movement going. But now you have a movement based on what? Because what's the message? If you're basically going to the public and saying, well, look, we know 9/11 is an inside job, and somebody else says, well, can you be specific? Well, we do know that the planes were actually drones and there were no hijackers. In fact, they're still alive. Now, any person at the public view is basically going to say, well, okay, what's your evidence for this? Well, we have this, and they'll show you the information coming from those films, like In Plain Sight or Loose Change. But they'll never show you any information, tangible information, documentation, files, eyewitness statements. They'll basically just assert that everything is false, that everything you learned about 9/11 is false from the federal government because it represents the official narrative. Now, this is really imperative, what I'm going to share with you next. Because coming from my experience in dealing with fringe conspiracy theorists of September 11, 2001, is that the official narrative, which is emanating from the 9/11 Commission report. Now, for years, up to this point, in the mid-2000s, people like Alex Jones and Dave Von Kleist and Jim Fetzer and Loose Change ad nauseum, as if it was a manipulating tool, chanted 9/11 is an inside job and the 9/11 Commission report is false and the official narrative is false. So what does that mean? Because it's a very vague statement. The official narrative is false, where they're alluding to the 9/11 Commission report, which is the official narrative to them. But they never read, generally, they don't read. And this book, which has 14 chapters, and it's over 600 pages long, they took a microcosm out of that book. And this is from my experience in dealing with them. The official narrative to them is this: 19 Islamic fundamentalists who hate our freedoms hijacked 4 planes and crashed them into the World Trade Center towers, 1 and 2, into the Pentagon in Shanksville. That's it. That's the official narrative to them. Because they don't talk about pre-9/11. Why? Because if there are no hijackers, what use is it to study the backgrounds of these people, where their ideology came from, what they were doing before 9/11, who they were talking to, who was monitoring them, who was listening to them, who was assisting them? Where were they before 9/11? What countries did they come from? What foreign intelligence were monitoring them? Where did they get their ideas from? From older terrorists? Well, if there are no hijackers, if there are no hijacked planes, then there is absolutely no need to look into anything pre-9/11. And this is what the official narrative has done for them. Most of these people in these groups basically, and this is a broad generalization, and I don't usually do this, but I have never met anyone who espouses that there were no hijackers, no planes, doesn't cater to what I just outlined as the official narrative for them. And so what they did basically was they actually looked at 9/11 through a misconstrued, prejudgmental view of September 11, 2001. In other words, I'm not going to look at any information from any federal agency. I'm not going to read any of the eyewitness statements. In fact, I'm going to cherry pick them. But I'm only going to look at information that agrees with my worldview. Because if you looked at 9/11 and right away you said it was an inside job. Before you even investigated it, you're only going to look at information that agrees with that worldview. In other words, it's like a police investigator goes to a crime scene and basically goes to the crime scene without even investigating what happened here and says, well, I know what didn't happen here. You would think that this man lost his mind or that he was a corrupt cop. Hope this guy's not at a crime scene where a relative of mine is involved. But that's exactly what the Fringe movement has done. They had looked at 9/11 and basically made a prejudgment and said 9/11 is an inside job. And why did they come to that conclusion? Because they watched films like In Plain Sight and Loose Change and read books by Thierry Meyssan. And what this did, it was by the mid-2000s onward, created a more fervent, more ardent, irrational movement. And what came from them were people like Barbara Honegger, Citizens Investigation Team, Judy Wood, Christopher Bollyn, Morgan Reynolds, John Lear, Pilots for 9/11 Truth, Ace Baker, Let's Roll Forums, Phil Jahan, Brian Staveley, and later on, more militant mindsets like Craig McKee, Sheila Casey, Adam Roth, Adam Syed, people who have no work in 9/11 whatsoever, but still fervently defend the completely irrational. Let's start with Citizens Investigation Team, led by two young men, Craig Ranke and Aldo Marquis, who not only take statements of people at the Pentagon, misconstrue their statements, but claim that a plane, instead of going south, was seen north of Citgo gas station and flew over the Pentagon. And when it flew over the Pentagon, a bomb exploded, and that's what happened at the Pentagon, the damage there. That the light poles that were knocked down by this plane weren't really knocked down by a plane, but they were knocked down the night prior. That the plane debris was planted in broad daylight by nefarious agents of the government. And to their eyewitnesses for a north side, the irony is that all those people basically saw the plane hit the Pentagon. None of their eyewitnesses ever saw a plane fly over the Pentagon, which makes you think, why does anyone take them seriously? Unfortunately, many thousands do. And the people I just mentioned, like Craig McKee and Adam Ruff, and Sheila Casey and Adam Syed, Xander Arena, Adam Eisenberg. These are people who still propagate that theory over 15 years later. This very fervent belief is so irrational, so remarkable, will be accepted in this small group in the 9/11 Truth Movement. Why? Because it opposes the official narrative. Anything to oppose the idea that planes could be hijacked by Arab fundamentalists. No matter how irrational, no matter how half-cocked, it will be accepted as long as it opposes the official narrative, according to these people. Christopher Bollyn, who blames Israel for every instance in the world, whether it's 9/11, 93, the Boston bombings. Here's a guy who doesn't believe in hijacked planes, that Israel was behind the hijacking of these planes. that the Israeli art student ring is basically the people who planted bombs in the buildings called Gelatin B, even though they're Australian. I mean, they're Austrian and not Jewish. They're still around. Rebekah Roth, who claims to be a flight attendant, never worked in any airline industry, wears wigs, goes by multiple names like Corey Ann Ashley, Monica Gaynor, basically suggesting that the planes were actually remotely guided into the ocean. And that, no, actually, what happened was, to her, the planes actually were remotely guided to a military hangar where they were forced under threat of death by U.S. military officials to make phone calls, loaded back onto the plane, and then flew out into the ocean, never to be seen again. The Fringe movement had created even a more fervent Fringe movement in the future, which have now basically are starting to die off. Basically because the censorship of the last 4 years, Google buying out YouTube, and now YouTube is restricting these channels. Now, I'm against restriction, no matter how much ridiculousness the person or group espouses, because I think everyone should have a right to speak. And I don't like censorship, because just because you censor them doesn't mean that you're next, because you are next. I want to be in charge whether to watch the person or not, because that's my right. And I want the right made by me, not somebody else, to make that right for me. So the Fringe movement are now even more fringe, but have now basically are dying off. Rebekah Roth is not active anymore. Citizens Investigation Team hasn't been active for the past 12 years. Pilots for 9/11 Truth, who basically are 5 pilots that basically espouse that the planes weren't hijacked, they're no longer active. Christopher Bollyn has not been active for 3 years. Loose Change has moved on. Dave Von Kleist, no longer active. And why aren't these people active? Well, if you repeat the same thing over and over again, if you don't look for information, you don't bring anything new. And when you rely on belief, when you rely on speculation, the imagination can only go so far as to where people will either start wondering whether you're a shill, doing this on purpose or not, intentionally misleading the audience, or you have lost the attention of the audience because you keep repeating yourself. And like I said, if you don't believe in hijackers, you don't believe in hijacked planes, you believe the phone calls are faked, if you believe that the evidence is planted, and you can't show valid information for this, how many times can you repeat that before you lose the attention of the audience? And that's exactly what happened. Now, unfortunately, we have Richard Gage, who is the founder of Architects and Engineers, has now moved on to his own group called 9/11 Unleashed. And because he did this, he basically has now entered the geopolitical field, of which he knows nothing about. And what has he done? He has basically arisen new interest in these old fringe theorists like Dave Von Kleist, Scott Bennett, Citizens Investigation Team, for which he denounced many years ago. Still around is Barbara Honegger. Barbara Honegger lies about what happened on 9/11, intentionally lies. But the truth movement, which is so imbued with these fringe theories, will never challenge her, will never tell her to prove these assertions. And this is the reason why she remains in the shadows, only to exist in viral media. Now, there are groups out there, 9/11 truth groups, basically Truth Action Project, Architects and Engineers, and Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And then you have cities like Boston for 9/11 Truth, We Are Change New York, We Are Change Florida. I think We Are Change Pittsburgh, maybe. Scholars for 9/11 Truth, Scientists for 9/11 Truth. But these are not major organizations like they once were. Architects and Engineers, which is the biggest group of all of them, have only 3,000 people, which ain't much at all. 21 years, you would like to see it at 300,000. It's 3,000. We have over 1 million architects and engineers in this country. They have 3,000. And if you're going to say, well, they don't want to talk, it'll ruin their profession. Well, how'd they get these guys to talk? Oh, these are retired people? Well, how many retired architects and engineers are there in the United States? Probably about as many, 1 million. How come they're not talking? How come not many more demolition experts are talking? I think you have one. I think Tom Sullivan is a demolition expert for the architects and engineers. But because it's the physics, I tend to stay away from it. I am not qualified to speak on the subject. As for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, well, their board members are the following: Barbara Honegger and Richard Gage. Two people who don't believe hijackers or hijacked planes. And according to Richard Gage, the 9/11 Truth Movement doesn't pertain to hijackers at all. Therefore, he is basically saying, I am the voice of the Truth Movement. Well, he would be the biggest name, but he certainly should not be at the front of the Truth Movement. And this is what people like myself are up against. And we're fighting a war on two fronts. One is a war for information, information from the federal government at the federal level. That's a war fighting for. File FOIA requests, pressure them to open up committees to investigate certain issues in 9/11. Once again, fighting them in courts, like Creedler and Motley Rice are doing successfully. And also a war against disinformation, which is tonight's live discussion point. And this is a war that we shouldn't be fighting. 21 years later, we are still fighting against disinformation, not from the CIA, not from the NSA, not from the federal government, but from those who claim to be truthers in the 9/11 Truth Movement. And you would think the one organization or the one movement that is basically going to fight on the side trying to obtain information, the fight for information, are the ones impeding that because they're spreading disinformation. Now, I have made many critical videos, and I have been highly critical, rude to the point in certain email exchanges with certain people, like Barbara Honegger. I've been patient with these people for many years, many years. And for them to basically continue to propagate known falsehoods, to espouse fringe ideas, which basically hinder any type of movement, any type of progress, is basically intentionally or unintentionally impeding the investigation into the 9/11 terrorist attacks, where we can actually show that there are anomalies which should be investigated. Now, here is my explanation for conspiracies for 9/11. And there's some people in this room, in fact, everyone here, basically have seen most of my live videos and the videos I have uploaded on YouTube, which are in the thousands, where I basically outlined that there was foreign and domestic intelligence pre 9/11 that had information that could have stopped the attacks. My last live video, I talked about the NSA, I talked about the CIA intentionally withholding information from the FBI and the State Department pre 9/11, where, if shared, could have stopped 9/11. I talked about the NSA wiretapping bin Laden's satellite phone from 1992 to 1998, and a house in Yemen, which was an Al Qaeda communications hub from 1996 to 2001. What I just said is not in the 9/11 Commission report. It was briefly mentioned in the Joint House inquiry. It was actually covered up. Well, there you go. That's a conspiracy. And that's not a fringe conspiracy. That's actually true. What about the additional hijackings that probably would have taken place on 9/11 and also on September 13th, 14th, where you had over 50 people arrested at LaGuardia and JFK who were trying to board the planes with weapons, and one dressed as a pilot who was actually a relative of Osama bin Laden? That's not a fringe conspiracy. That actually was covered up by the FBI. It actually happened. In fact, to read up more about that, go to Truth or TV, Nelson Martin, DJ Double Detonator's channel. He's the only person to ever report on this. The fringe conspiracy movement, well, they wouldn't know anything about it. Why? Because they don't believe in hijackers. So what's the sense of looking into this? I don't need to look into their backgrounds. And by doing this, this is what they did. This is why the harmful effects of fringe conspiracies are harmful, is that by suggesting that there were no hijackers on these planes, that there were no hijackers involved, that means that all the intelligence agencies like the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, the Israeli Mossad, Saudi GID, Pakistan ISI, are also not involved. Because if there are no hijackers, who are they investigating? Who are they monitoring? Who are they assisting? And if there's no intelligence rings, that means there's no operations, like the Bin Laden issue station in Langley, the Bin Laden unit at the FBI, the Bin Laden listening post at the NSA. And so the foreign policy guidelines of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the neoconservatives of the early 90s, late 80s, these guidelines remain unofficial. That means we never really invaded Iraq. Because, remember, we invaded Iraq because they're involved with the 9/11 attacks. The invasion of Afghanistan. Operation Jawbreaker, which was basically an operation by the special forces of the United States and the Afghans of the Northern Alliance, in which they decimated Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and Bin Laden. Well, if there's no Bin Laden, these operations don't exist. So if there's no hijackers and no intelligence agencies, that means all of this, and even in the years prior to 9/11, don't have to be researched or studied. All you have to do is basically repeat yourself and say, there's no hijackers, before you become a parrot. And basically, you lose the attention of the audience. And this is the reason why you don't hear nobody no more. There's very few people, Richard Gage and Barbara Honegger, that's it. No major proponents of these fringe conspiracies exist anymore because they kept repeating themselves over and over again and kept leaning on their own speculations and used it as evidence and are not taken seriously by the public. And what they did was basically they became the media darlings between 2005 to 2009. Oh, David Ray Griffin, Kevin Barrett, John Lear, Morgan Reynolds. John Lear, Morgan Reynolds proposed that the planes weren't even real, that they were holograms. Judy Wood actually proposes that the World Trade Center were actually dustified, which is actually not even a scientific term. Dustified by an invisible military space beam where it can melt the World Trade Center towers into dust but leave human beings untouched. The media interviewed these people and said that these people are part of the 9/11 truth movement. And so by doing this, they put the idea of the 9/11 truth movement as nothing more than a very half-cocked, half-crazed Looney Tunes, which are now in the minds of the American people. Because Fox and MSNBC interviewed these people like Richard Gage and Kevin Barrett and David Ray Griffin. And by doing this, they're now in the default position of being involved with Alex Jones and Jim Fetzer. And because of this, anybody who dares question the government will always be seen in the same light as them. And that includes us, because we dare question the government. But at least we have valid information that shows that there are anomalies with 9/11. But we'll never be taken seriously because they are contradictory to the statements made in the 9/11 Commission report, Georgetown Degree, and the FBI pet bomb report. And what happened was 9/11 Commission report basically to the 9/11 truth movement, everything is false. Well, that's a very, first of all, that's not right. It's not correct. Not everything in the 9/11 Commission report is false. Did the attacks happen on September 11, 2001? Yes. So that's not false. Not everything is false. 9/11 Commission report is not totally false, but it's not totally true. And this is something that's not understood by the fringe movement. The 9/11 Commission report is incomplete because most of the data, including some I just shared with you, is not reported in the report. Like the monitoring operation by the NSA of bin Laden's satellite phone in the house in Yemen, or the Defense Intelligence Agency's Able Danger. I've interviewed 2 people from Able Danger, which was a covert unit involving people from the Land Information Warfare Activities Division and the U.S. Army, Anthony Schaefer and Eric Kleinsmith, where Anthony Schaefer even says he met with the director, Philip Zelikow, in Bagram Air Force Base, told him about the operation, and became the first person outside of that unit to become aware of the unit, and didn't even put it in the 9/11 Commission report. Not one word. So, I can name a lot of other issues too that aren't in the report. But you can see where I'm telling you is that 9/11 Commission report is not totally false. It's not totally true. It's an incomplete report. It's an incomplete report. Same as the FBI pet bomb investigation. Same as the Joint House inquiry. But with the Joint House inquiry, there was a lot more covered up than there were misreports. To the fringe movement, anything from the federal government will always be in question, even actual whistleblowers like Mark Rossini or Robert Wright Jr., Colleen Rowley, Ken Williams, the Phoenix Memo, warned about Arab fundamentalists training at flight schools in Scottsdale, Arizona, months prior to 9/11. These people came out, had their Thomas Drake from the NSA, William Binney of the NSA, Kirk J. Wiebe, and Ed Loomis, who all came out against the federal government and paid with it almost with their lives. Some of these people were arrested or threatened with civil litigation. That's what a whistleblower does. He blows the whistle on these agencies or the federal government, or maybe even a combination of both, and has their profession and their life in danger. People like Barbara Honegger, who claims to be a whistleblower, well, she's not blowing the whistle on anything because most everything she says, she just makes up. So it's not actually threatening the establishment, it's helping them. Because if you don't believe in the planes and you don't believe in hijackers, you think the planes are holograms, and you look down the center, you get people to become interested in this. What you're doing is instead of looking at the actual anomalies that I outlined before, they're looking at these anomalies that don't even exist. So, who is it helping? Is it helping the State Department, the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA by looking at dead ends? Well, yes, it's exactly right. And Barbara Honegger has been doing that for years, 15, 16 years. And Richard Gage, he's now entertaining this because he's no longer part of architects and engineers. He now wants to espouse these theories or promote these theories and support these theorists on his own show. That's why I'm highly critical of both. Because they're the major voices of the truth movement. And they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be anywhere near a microphone while representing a truth movement. Because what they're offering isn't true. But the truth movement has a problem. If they advocate against these people, if they speak out against these people, then the radical fervents, the adherents of this group, will come as one and challenge that person and say, well, he's the shill and he supports the official narrative. It's almost like this brainwashing technique where the most radical fundamentalists of a group will basically act as one and challenge anything that represents the official narrative. No matter how ridiculous, no matter how irrational it is, it will be supported if it goes against the official narrative. And this is the main problem of the 9/11 truth movement today. And the dividing line is the Pentagon and Shanksville incidents. Because the most radical fundamentalists of the fringe movement are those who don't believe a plane hit the Pentagon in Shanksville. These are the most loyal, unwavering people who actually have a driven hatred, even for the founding fathers of the truth movement, like David Chandler and Wayne Costi and Ken Jenkins and Warren Stutt, John Wyndham and Jim Hoffman, and John Gold. They hate these people because they propositioned that, yes, hijacked planes happened, and they crashed into the Pentagon Shanksville. David Chandler at one time was the face of the 9/11 truth movement. Was a huge name. When I first started investigating 9/11 back in 2006, I heard the name David Chandler. I've watched many of his videos. But ever since he worked with Wayne Costi on his program about of this 5-hour presentation of what happened at the Pentagon, he has been vilified by the very movement he helped to build because of these radical fundamentalists of the fringe conspiracy movement. And if you're going to think that you're going to get a new 9/11 investigation and you're going to have Richard Gage and Barbara Honegger as major board members, influential board members of certain of these organizations, you're going to be actually what will happen to you is that the public, as well as the government, will basically chastise you. Well, you got a no planer here. These people don't believe in hijackers. In fact, they think that the hijackers are alive. All this is going to come to light. And no matter what kind of rational argument you may have in another area, it won't matter because the media and the public will just remember that. And they'll hammer it home saying, you see, anyone who questions the federal government will be labeled just as nutty as these people. And this is the reason why I am highly critical of people like Richard Gage and Barbara Honegger, as well as past fringe conspiracists like Christopher Bollyn and Loose Change and others. Nobody held them to account. Most of all, the truth movement. They allowed it to ferment. And when it fermented, it became a poison. And it poisoned the whole river of truth. You no longer have a truth movement. You have a fringe movement. And this is the reason why, after 21 years, you are stuck in viral media. You're not in the courts. You're waiting to be heard. The Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry is not in court, no matter what Jean Laratanda tells you. You're waiting to be heard, which basically could be stuck for many years. And as long as you don't investigate the pre-intelligence of 9/11, the actual cover-up of additional hijackings, or the foreign intelligence services of Israel and Saudi Arabia that were involved with the monitoring of hijackers, that may have pre-intelligence that could have stopped 9/11, like the NSA and the CIA did, as long as you don't investigate these issues where names could be held for account, and if you're stuck at ground zero thinking that nanothermite took down the towers, but you don't know who put it there, or that Larry Silverstein made a killing even though he went broke and had to relinquish rights to One World Trade Center in the rebuild process, and as long as you're looking down living hijackers or CGI planes or the plane swaps, as long as you're looking down that dead end, you're no longer looking at the actual anomalies and the real people who got away with the cover-up, who got away with assisting these operators. They'll get away clean, just like JFK. Just like 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Just like the assassination of Martin Luther King, the assassination of Malcolm X, the assassination of RFK. Now, I'll end it with this, is that I'm not saying that people like Richard Gage or Barbara Honegger or CIA plants, I won't even go as far as saying maybe Alex Jones, because Alex Jones has a huge audience. These people don't. In fact, the CIA actually probably doesn't even know they exist. But they might as well work for the CIA because that's exactly who they're helping. They're helping these people cover up the actual anomalies of pre-9/11 intelligence by advocating for no hijackers and fake phone calls and CGI planes and Judy Wood space beams. You might as well just say that Scooby-Doo was involved. Because what's the difference? There is none. And when it comes to 9/11, unfortunately, there are two camps, truthers and debunkers, who argue online endlessly. I became a victim of that many years ago, in which nothing can be gained and nothing can be learned. But the most important thing is that time is wasted. Precious time that passes. And as each second, each minute, each day that passes while you're looking at a dead end or you're arguing on viral media, that's 1 second, 1 minute, 1 day, 1 month, 1 year for these people to continue unobstructed by the chains of justice. Thanks for coming on tonight. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next live video.